The music at the family party was loud, glasses clinked, and everyone laughed as though the night was perfect. But Mina's world shattered in a single moment when her older brother, Sephu, banged his glass on the table and stood tall with a wicked grin. "Now I'm the owner of that house," he shouted across the room, his voice slicing through the laughter. "Get out, Mina. You were never meant to have it." Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned toward Mina as whispers spread like fire. Her heart raced. That house wasn't just four walls. It was her sanctuary, her dream, her late mother's last gift to her. She froze in disbelief, torn between screaming back or walking away. But in that silence, a decision formed in her heart that would change everything. The family party was supposed to be a night of happiness. Music played, food was served, and everyone was laughing together. Mina felt a little warmth in her heart, because this was the first family gathering after their mother's passing, and she wanted peace more than anything. But just when the night seemed calm, Sephu suddenly stood up. He raised his glass high, wearing a smile that didn't look kind. Everyone turned to him, waiting for a toast. Instead, his words cut deep. He shouted that he was now the owner of Mina's house, and that she had no right to live there anymore. The room went silent for a moment, then whispers began to spread like fire. Some gasped, some shook their heads, but many just stared at Mina. Her hands trembled as she sat frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. That house wasn't only a building. It was her safe place, the last thing her mother had given her. Hearing her brother claim it so boldly in front of everyone felt like a knife in her chest. What hurt more was the way the relatives reacted. Instead of defending her, many of them nodded as if they already knew what Sephu was saying. Mina's heart sank even deeper. She realized that people had been talking behind her back for months, saying she didn't deserve the house. Now Sephu had chosen this moment, in the middle of a party, to shame her. He smirked proudly, enjoying her silence. His words were heavy, loud enough to crush her spirit in front of the whole family. Mina wanted to stand up and fight back, but her voice failed her. The humiliation was unbearable, and every eye in the room was on her, waiting to see what she would do. She felt her heart race, her chest tighten, but she kept still, holding back her tears. In that moment, the celebration turned into a nightmare. What was meant to bring the family together had torn Mina apart. Instead of joy, the air was filled with tension and judgment. Sephu had made his move, and Mina was left standing at the edge of betrayal, her world shaking while everyone else looked on. Mina sat frozen, her brother's words still echoing in her ears. She waited for someone, anyone, in the family to stand up for her, to tell Sephu that he was wrong. But instead of hearing support, she saw something that broke her even more. One by one, her relatives began to nod slowly, as if they agreed with him. Some avoided her eyes, while others whispered to each other with tight smiles. Mina's stomach twisted. It felt like the whole room had turned against her. She searched every face around the table, hoping to see kindness, but instead she saw judgment. An aunt leaned closer to another and muttered, "I always said she shouldn't keep that house." A cousin smirked and said, "Sephu was meant to take over, not her." Their words felt like sharp stones thrown at her, cutting deeper than Sephu's declaration. Mina realized this wasn't just his idea. People had been talking behind her back for months, spreading lies and doubts about her. It struck her that all the little comments she had ignored before were pieces of a bigger plan. The way relatives had avoided discussing the house with her, the way some of them stopped visiting after her mother's passing. It all made sense now. They believed she didn't deserve the home, the one place that still carried her mother's memory. The betrayal was worse than anything Sephu could have done alone. These were people who had eaten at her table, people who once laughed with her, now nodding in agreement to take away the only thing she had left. Mina's chest tightened. Her hands trembled on her lap as her heart pounded faster. She wanted to scream at them, to ask why they hated her so much, but her throat felt dry and heavy. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about loyalty, family, and trust. She had thought they loved her, but their silence and approval of Sephu's claim showed the truth. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. She sat in silence, forcing her face to stay calm even as her world cracked inside. In that moment, Mina understood she was alone. The whispers had already judged her, the family had already chosen sides, and their choice was not her. That shocking betrayal cut deeper than anything else, leaving her with a pain she would never forget. Sephu enjoyed the silence he had created. With a proud smile, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He held it high in the air like it was a trophy. Everyone's eyes followed his hand as he shook the paper and announced that this was the proof that their late parents had intended the house to belong to him. His voice carried so much confidence that some relatives even clapped lightly, as if his words had settled the matter. Mina's breath caught in her chest. Proof. She leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the paper, and asked quietly but firmly, "Let me see it." But Sephu laughed, refusing to hand it over. He shook his head and tucked the paper closer to his chest. "You don't need to read it," he said smugly. "I already know what it says, and so does everyone else. Mother and father wanted me to have the house, not you." His words were sharp, filled with arrogance, and he clearly enjoyed the power he now held over her. The relatives leaned in, whispering among themselves. Some nodded, convinced that the paper was real. Others exchanged doubtful looks but said nothing. Mina's heart pounded faster. She didn't understand why Sephu would refuse to show it if it was truly genuine. The thought of her parents choosing him over her stabbed at her heart, but deep inside, something didn't feel right. She knew her mother's handwriting, her way of leaving notes and letters. If this paper was real, why hide it from her? Mina stood from her seat, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "If you are telling the truth, then you won't mind letting me read it. Let everyone here see it." The room grew tense, and all eyes turned to Sephu. But instead of agreeing, he stepped back, folding the paper tightly in his fist. His face hardened. "This is not for your eyes, Mina," he snapped. "You wouldn't understand it anyway." The smirk on his face returned, and Mina felt her blood boil. The humiliation was unbearable, but now suspicion burned stronger than her pain. She could feel that something about that paper was wrong. If it truly proved his claim, he would have shown it proudly. But his refusal only revealed his fear. In that moment, Mina understood that Sephu wasn't just trying to shame her. He was hiding something. That unseen document was his weapon, and until she uncovered the truth, he would keep using it to turn the family against her. Mina felt every eye in the room on her, waiting to see if she would fight back. Sephu still clutched the folded paper like a weapon, his smirk daring her to argue. The whispers around the room grew louder, and her relatives leaned closer to each other, exchanging cruel smiles as if she had already lost. Mina's lips trembled, and her chest burned with anger, but she knew deep inside that if she shouted now, no one would believe her. They had already chosen sides, and her voice would only be drowned out by their judgment. So instead of giving them the reaction they wanted, Mina slowly stood up. She pushed her chair back, her movements calm and steady, though her heart raced wildly inside her chest. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the very people who once claimed to love her. None of them looked back with kindness. Some avoided her gaze, others stared with satisfaction, but not one person spoke in her defense. The betrayal stung worse than any insult. Mina wanted to scream that the house was her mother's final gift, that she knew in her heart her parents had trusted her with it, but she pressed her lips tightly together. She refused to give Sephu the victory of seeing her break down. Without a single word, she picked up her bag and straightened her shoulders. Her silence was heavier than any argument she could have made. The room fell quiet as she walked toward the door. Every step she took felt like fire burning in her chest. She knew they thought her silence meant defeat, but it was not surrender. It was strength. Her mind was already racing, her heart already planning. She would not fight in this room filled with lies. She would fight where truth could not be twisted. As Mina reached the door, she paused for a moment. Her back was to them, but she could feel Sephu's smug eyes on her. She tightened her fist around her bag, steadying herself. Then she walked out, leaving behind the whispers, the betrayal, and the noise. Outside, the night air hit her face, cool and sharp, as if reminding her to stay strong. She breathed deeply, her anger now turning into determination. Mina knew this was not the end. She had left the party in silence, but inside, her heart burned brighter than ever. She would uncover the truth, and when she returned, it would not be with tears, it would be with proof that no lie could destroy. Mina returned home with her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The silence she carried at the party had followed her back, but now it turned into something stronger, a burning need to find the truth. She could not sleep that night. Instead, she walked into her mother's old room, a place she had not entered since the funeral. The scent of her mother's perfume still lingered faintly, bringing tears to her eyes. But Mina wiped them quickly. She was not here to cry. She was here to search. She began opening drawers, one after another, carefully lifting folded clothes and faded photographs. Her hands moved slowly, almost trembling, as if she feared what she might find. For hours she searched, but nothing looked unusual. Doubt started creeping into her mind. What if Sephu was right? What if her parents had truly chosen him? The thought pierced her heart, but just as she was about to give up, something caught her eye. At the bottom of an old wooden chest, hidden beneath a stack of carefully folded wrappers, she noticed a small envelope. Her breath hitched as she pulled it out. The paper was old but sealed tightly, and on the front, in her mother's handwriting, was her name, Mina. Her hands shook as she opened it, unfolding the letter inside. Her mother's words filled the page, written with love and trust. She explained that the house had been legally transferred to Mina before her passing, not because she loved Sephu any less, but because she believed Mina would protect the family's legacy with honesty and care. As Mina read, tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were not from pain. They were from relief. The letter also mentioned a small key, hidden in the lining of the chest, that opened a box containing important documents. Mina searched carefully and soon felt the cold touch of a key tucked deep into the fabric. She held it tightly, realizing her mother had left her more than just words. She had left her proof. Mina pressed the letter to her chest, her heart beating faster than ever. The lies Sephu had thrown at her were already beginning to crumble in her mind. Her mother had trusted her, and that trust was now her strength. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. She was no longer lost or broken. She now held the key, both literally and in spirit, to exposing Sephu's deceit. The truth was hidden in her hands, and she would make sure the world saw it. Mina sat on the floor of her room with the letter spread across her lap, and the small key resting in her palm. Her hands still shook, but this time it was not from fear. It was from the weight of what she had just uncovered. She could feel her mother's presence in every word written on the page. The letter was clear, gentle but firm. Her mother had not left the decision to chance. She had gone to the lawyers, updated the documents, and legally transferred the ownership of the house to Mina. It was not an accident. It was not confusion. It was a deliberate choice made out of love and trust. Her mother had written that Mina was the one who carried patience and honesty, the one who could keep the house not just as a building, but as a place of peace for generations. She explained that Sephu, though loved, had shown signs of greed and pride that worried her deeply. The words were like both comfort and pain to Mina. Comfort, because she finally had proof that her mother believed in her. Pain, because it confirmed her mother had seen the very flaws in Sephu that now threatened to destroy everything. Mina pressed her fingers against the paper, tears sliding down her cheeks. She remembered how her mother used to call her the quiet strength of the family, the one who never shouted but always stood firm. Now she understood why her mother had chosen her. The truth was no longer hidden in whispers or lies. It was written in ink, sealed by law, and placed carefully in her hands. She used the small key to unlock the box her mother had mentioned. Inside were official documents stamped and signed, clearly naming Mina as the legal owner of the house. Her breath caught as she ran her fingers over the seal. This was undeniable. No fake paper that Sephu waved around could stand against these records. Her mother had outsmarted every possible betrayal by leaving her with the strongest weapon, truth. For a long moment, Mina just sat there, staring at the documents, her heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. She whispered softly to herself, promising her mother that she would honor this trust, no matter how hard the battle became. She realized now that the house was not just walls and a roof. It was a symbol of her mother's faith in her, a legacy built on love and sacrifice. The shocking discovery gave Mina new strength. The fear and shame she had carried since the party melted away, replaced by determination. Sephu thought he had cornered her, but he had no idea that their mother had already chosen her path long ago. Mina wiped her tears, lifted her head, and knew the fight was only beginning. But this time, she had the truth on her side. Mina woke up the next morning with a new kind of energy flowing through her. The night before had given her more than just sleepless hours. It had given her answers. She held her mother's letter close to her chest and kept the official documents safely in her bag. Still, she knew the road ahead would not be easy. Sephu was bold, and his confidence at the party showed that he was ready to fight dirty. Mina could not fight this battle alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who would not only believe her but also guide her. There was only one person who came to her mind, her childhood friend Kato. He had studied law and now worked as a lawyer in the city. Over the years, he had been more like a brother than a friend, someone Mina could always lean on. Without hesitation, she called him, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened at the family party. Kato listened quietly, his tone calm but firm, and told her to meet him immediately. When Mina arrived at his office, she placed the letter and the legal documents on the table. Kato read each line carefully, nodding slowly, his expression turning serious. Then Mina explained about the paper Sephu had waved at the party, claiming it was proof of ownership. Her voice cracked as she remembered the humiliation, but Kato quickly raised his hand, reassuring her. "Mina," he said gently, "if Sephu truly had a genuine document, he wouldn't hide it from you. That already raises suspicion. From what you've told me, there's a strong chance it is forged." Mina felt her chest tighten. The thought that her own brother would go as far as forging papers just to steal from her was painful, but Kato's calmness gave her strength. He explained how common it was for greedy relatives to create fake documents when property was involved, hoping fear would silence the rightful owner. He looked directly into her eyes and said, "Your mother was wise. She prepared everything correctly. You have the real documents and the law is on your side." Hearing those words lifted a weight from Mina's shoulders. For the first time since the party, she felt she was not standing alone. Kato promised to help her every step of the way. He would check the authenticity of Sephu's so-called paper if it ever appeared, and he would make sure Mina's rights were protected. Mina left his office with her head higher than before. The fire inside her was no longer just anger, it was courage. She knew there would be more humiliation, more tricks from Sephu, but now she had both her mother's trust and her friend's support. That combination gave her a strength she never thought she had. The battle was far from over, but Mina was finally ready to fight. The day of the hearing arrived, and Mina walked into the courtroom with her heart steady, but her mind alert. She wore no sign of fear, only quiet determination. Beside her was Kato, her trusted friend and lawyer, who gave her a nod of reassurance. Across the room, Sephu stood tall, dressed sharply and smiling proudly, as if he had already won. Several relatives sat behind him, whispering among themselves, still convinced that the house belonged to him. Mina felt their stares, but she did not let them shake her. She knew the truth was in her hands. The judge entered and the case began. Sephu was quick to step forward. He pulled out the same folded paper he had flashed at the party, holding it up with confidence. His voice was loud, his words rehearsed, as he declared that their parents had always intended the property for him. He spoke about tradition, about being the eldest son, and about responsibility. He waved the paper in the air dramatically, showing it to the court but never allowing anyone to examine it closely. His arrogance filled the room, and some of the relatives behind him nodded in agreement. Mina listened quietly, her eyes fixed on him, but inside she was calm. When it was her turn, Kato guided her to the front. With steady hands, Mina placed a sealed envelope on the table. The judge leaned forward as Kato explained that this was a letter written by their late mother, addressed directly to Mina. The envelope was opened carefully, and the words were read aloud in court. Each line was clear, direct, and full of love. The letter stated without doubt that the house had been legally transferred to Mina, because their mother trusted her to keep the family's legacy safe. A silence spread across the courtroom as the judge examined the letter. But Mina was not finished. From her bag, she brought out the official property deed, stamped and signed by the right authorities. She handed it over with firm confidence. The judge studied it, nodding slowly, and asked Sephu to submit his own document for inspection. When the paper Sephu had been waving was finally taken, it did not take long for the truth to come out. The signatures did not match, and the details were inconsistent. It was declared suspicious, possibly forged. The color drained from Sephu's face as murmurs filled the room. The relatives who once sat proudly behind him now looked away. Embarrassed by the lies they had believed, Mina stood silently, her heart racing, but her face calm. She had not shouted or begged. She had simply let the truth speak. In that courtroom, the lies that once humiliated her crumbled, and the strength of her mother's trust finally shone through. The courtroom was filled with silence as the judge turned his attention back to Sephu. His once proud shoulders were no longer steady, and the smirk that had lived on his face since the beginning was gone. The judge asked him to explain the document he had been waving so confidently just minutes before. Sephu tried to clear his throat, his voice shaky now, but every word he spoke sounded weaker than the one before. He claimed the paper was given to him by their parents, yet when pressed for details he stumbled. Dates did not match. Names were misspelled. The ink looked too fresh. What he once held up as his greatest weapon now betrayed him in front of everyone. The relatives who had crowded behind him, clapping and whispering about his victory before, now leaned forward in confusion. Some frowned. Others exchanged doubtful looks. For years, they had believed Sephu was the strong, rightful heir, but now they saw cracks in the story. Each question from the judge or Mina's lawyer revealed more of his lies, and the confidence he once carried melted into nervous excuses. Kato, Mina's lawyer, asked him directly why he never submitted the so-called will to any authority after their parents' death. Sephu's lips trembled as he muttered something about not knowing the process, but his words were empty. Another question followed. Why was the signature of their father different from every other record kept at the registry? Sephu's face turned pale. He looked around the courtroom, hoping for support, but the same relatives who once nodded proudly at his speeches now avoided his eyes. The truth was too clear to deny. The judge pointed out the inconsistencies one by one, and with each revelation, Sephu's story crumbled. His voice cracked when he tried to defend himself, and sweat appeared on his forehead. The man who had once boasted of being the rightful owner of the house was now caught in his own trap. His arrogance had built a wall around him, but the wall had fallen, and everyone could see him for what he really was. Mina did not need to say much. She stood quietly, her calmness in sharp contrast to Sephu's panic. Her silence spoke louder than words, and it only made his fall more painful to watch. Relatives who had mocked Mina before now whispered among themselves, their support slowly shifting. They realized they had been cheering for greed, not for truth. At last, when the judge announced that the deed Mina presented was the only valid proof, the final blow landed. Sephu lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His lies had not only been exposed but had destroyed his pride. The relatives who once clapped for him now looked at Mina with new respect. In one moment, the crowd that had turned against her was forced to see the truth, while Sephu stood defeated, a prisoner of his own deceit. Mina rose slowly, her voice steady but full of emotion as she faced the very people who once mocked her. The courtroom had fallen into complete silence, all eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath and said, "This house was not just my mother's gift. It is a reminder that truth survives lies. You tried to throw me out, Sephu, but I'm still standing where I belong." Her words echoed through the room like a strike of thunder, cutting through every doubt that had been placed on her. The relatives who once clapped for Sephu now sat frozen, ashamed of how quickly they had believed his lies. Some lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze, while others exchanged guilty looks. Sephu himself shrank in his chair, his arrogance shattered. The smirk he had carried so proudly when the party began was gone forever. He looked smaller than ever, exposed in front of the very family he wanted to impress. Mina did not raise her voice, yet her calm strength carried more power than any shout could have. She spoke not only to Sephu but to everyone in that room. "My mother trusted me, because she knew I would protect what she built. You thought you could erase that with forged papers, but lies can never bury the truth." Every word was like a flame that burned away the last traces of doubt. The judge nodded in agreement, confirming that the house legally belonged to her. With that final judgment, it was no longer a battle, it was her victory. Mina stood with quiet dignity, her head high, her heart steady. The same woman who had walked away silently from the party, humiliated and hurt, now stood triumphant, proving her strength without shouting or begging. One by one, her relatives began to clap, some even standing to show respect. The party that had started with her shame had turned into her moment of glory. Mina had not only reclaimed her home, but had reclaimed her honor. She had shown them all that patience, courage, and truth could outshine any lie. Sephu could not lift his eyes. The same family that had once cheered for him now looked at him with disgust. His fall was complete, and Mina's rise was undeniable. As Mina left the courtroom, she walked tall, carrying her mother's memory like a crown. She had fought with grace, and she had won. What began as humiliation ended as her ultimate triumph, and everyone who witnessed it would never forget the day Mina stood unshaken, unbroken, and victorious.